Get ready, because today we're going to separate bad heroes from good ones. We're going to have a lot of fun, and the way this works is that first off, we'll discuss what makes a hero interesting. Then we'll look at specific types of bad heroes. For each type, I'll give you a bad example from a story, and I'll explain why it sucks. Then I'll give you a good example and explain why that one works. Just to be clear, this video will focus strictly on characters who are traditionally heroic. This means we won't be covering anti-heroes, darker heroes, or even regular protagonists. Alright, with that out of the way, let's answer the question, what makes a hero interesting? I came up with 5 things. The first thing is that they possess admirable qualities. This means that they have strong values, they do the right thing, and they look out for others. Strong values include things like honesty, humility, sincerity, optimism, responsibility, courage, persistence, and so on. Regardless of what values they hold, these characters do what is right. They may slip up now and again because they're human, but for the most part, they protect others, limit suffering, and do their best to create a better world. Second thing that makes a hero interesting, they have their values tested. It's not enough to simply have values. Heroes must also be challenged so that we can see how they stand by their values when the chips are down. That's why we want to give our heroes brutal dilemmas. Force them to make a choice when there is no clean or easy answer. Push them to their limits, break them, and see how they respond. It's important to do this because if we don't test them, these heroes can seem predictable, one-dimensional, or preachy when they're constantly doing the right thing. Third thing that makes a hero interesting, they suffer. Morally good heroes are rarely the coolest characters in the story, so rather than trying to make them seem cool, make them suffer. This not only creates conflict, but it makes the character more relatable and sympathetic. That's why we want to show them repeatedly getting knocked down, and once they're knocked down, we need to stomp on them. Punish them for who they are. Punish them for the good they do. Punish them when they fail. And when we do reward them, we need to make sure there's another punishment on the way. Fourth thing that makes a hero interesting, they grow and they transform the people around them. Though heroes often serve as the story's moral compass, they shouldn't be perfect. The most interesting heroes deal with flaws, misbeliefs, and shortcomings. They make mistakes, they fall short, and they even give up. These problems are important because they enable heroes to pick themselves up, change their ways, and inspire the people around them. Finally, the fifth thing that makes a hero interesting is that they embrace impossible challenges. Being heroic means doing what the average person is afraid to do. Sometimes this means the hero must face overwhelming odds or a vastly superior opponent. Other times it means the hero must make a brutal choice or a huge sacrifice. Whatever it is, a hero needs to show courage and inner strength during these moments. They need to rise to the challenge. Now let's get to the bad versus good. I'm going to give you 3 types of bad heroes. I'll explain what each one is, then I'll give you a bad example to illustrate what I mean, and I'll explain why it sucks, and then I'll give you a good example that does the job better, and I'll explain why that one works. First type of bad hero is the easy mode hero. This is a hero who faces no significant opposition. Usually the problem is that there's a dumb or weak villain, and the hero faces obstacles and dilemmas that are easily overcome. Because of this, there's a lack of meaningful conflict, and there's also a lack of suffering and value testing. For a bad example, I'm going to be a total villain and go after Superman from the 1978 movie. Though Clark himself has charm here, this version of Superman is bland because the movie's difficulty is set to very easy. Aside from his father's death early on, he barely suffers at all. In fact, the entire second half of the movie feels like a victory lap, and although there are moments that should be difficult, bad writing comes to the rescue and bails him out of trouble. The most notable example of this is when Lex Luthor weakens Superman with kryptonite. Now, Lex is the villain in this one. In many Superman stories, he's portrayed as a genius mastermind, but in this one, he's dumber than Johnny from The Room. Basically, Lex spends the entire movie bragging about how evil he is, then he buys a bunch of cheap land in the desert and prepares to launch missiles at the East Coast and West Coast in hopes of boosting his property value. But of course, there's a problem for him. Superman is out there and he can stop the missiles. Lex somehow figures out that Superman's weakness is kryptonite, and then he lures our hero into a swimming pool and wraps a kryptonite necklace around him. This looks like it might actually be a challenge, but guess what? Lex's girlfriend has family in New Jersey, and she wants Superman to stop her boyfriend's missiles. She makes him promise to save New Jersey first, and he keeps his promise before flying back to save the West Coast. Here the missile strikes, but he's able to fix the damage rather easily, and he saves everyone except Lois Lane. She dies, but it's no big deal because he hits Control-Z by flying around the Earth repeatedly until he reverses time and undoes her death. This sucks because Superman faces underwhelming obstacles. Most of the conflict is either superficial or easily overcome, and what contributes to the problem is that this version of Lex Luthor is pathetic. If you want to create a strong hero, you have to pair them with a strong villain, but Lex is too goofy and careless to be compelling here. There's also the problem of bad writing saving the hero during a crisis. Rather than having Superman come up with a clever way to escape the kryptonite, the plot hands him an easy out. Finally, the missile dilemma isn't as interesting as it should be. Basically, Lex's girlfriend makes the decision for Superman by having him promise to stop the eastbound missile. She robs him of the ability to weigh his options and make a choice, and from there it's just a matter of him showing off his superpowers and saving the day. For a good example, let's look at the 2011 movie version of Captain America. Here we have a character who's introduced as this weak little guy who has strong morals and motivations. He wants to join the war effort, but he gets denied repeatedly because of his size. Then easy mode kicks in. With the help of a special formula, he transforms from a shrimp to a super soldier. This could have been a situation where he steamrolls through the rest of the story, but instead he gets a brand new set of problems. Despite being a super soldier, he's forbidden from joining the war effort while people test his blood in hopes of recreating the formula. Cap then rots away as a war bond promoter until his best friend Bucky goes missing in action. That's when Cap refuses to remain on the sidelines. He embarks on a solo mission to rescue Bucky and hundreds of other soldiers. In the process, he encounters Red Skull, the leader of Hydra who plans to harness the power of the Tesseract in order to destroy the Allied armies. This guy underwent the same experiment that transformed Cap, which makes him a worthy opponent. Anyway, after rescuing Bucky and hundreds of other soldiers, Cap is recognized as a hero, but his new status creates challenges for him. First, it puts unwelcome strain on his romantic life, and later, when he assembles a team to attack Hydra, he loses Bucky during a critical mission. Following the mission, Cap attempts to drink away his sorrow, but he's so powerful that he can't get drunk. And that's one of those little details that I love. If you're writing an overpowered hero, you gotta show the downsides of being that powerful. Finally, the movie builds toward a showdown between Cap and Red Skull that takes place aboard a bomber that's set to attack Allied territory. The two battle until the Tesseract vaporizes the power-hungry Red Skull and burns a hole in the ship. This presents Cap with a tough dilemma, and he chooses to take down the plane rather than risk having anyone else suffer. He sacrifices himself, says goodbye to Agent Carter, and spends the next 70 years frozen away in time. This works because the story consistently challenges Cap from different angles, whether it's society, supporting characters, his superiors, or the villain Red Skull. Even Cap's own superpowers create complications for him, and despite all this, Cap holds true to his values and grows into a leader. But it doesn't come easily. Doing the right thing comes with a cost, particularly when he starts leading missions and he loses Bucky in the process. And then finally at the end, Cap faces an impossible challenge and makes a heroic sacrifice, one that punishes him in a unique and painful way. Second type of bad hero is the safety net hero. This is a hero who is not allowed to suffer or fail because they're protected by the writers. The hero's bad choices are not appropriately punished, consequences are swept under the rug, convenient solutions are handed to them, and sacrifices, if they make them, end up feeling weak or empty. For a bad example, let's look at the Homecoming version of Spider-Man. Now, normally I love Spider-Man, I say wonderful things about him, but the Homecoming version of the character is a total disappointment from a writing standpoint. Not only is he carried through the movie by Iron Man and technology, but the writers make every effort to make Peter's journey as painless as possible. The movie opens with Peter as a 15-year-old superhero who wants to become an Avenger. When he stumbles upon local criminals who deal in alien weapons, he hunts them down and ends up getting his ass kicked. But instead of suffering consequences, Peter gets rescued by Iron Man. Peter then becomes obsessed with stopping the criminals in order to make a name for himself, and in the process he becomes torn between his Spider self and his Peter self. Usually something like this would create meaningful suffering while the hero attempts to find balance, but not in this movie. Just listen to the problems Peter faces. First, his best friend Ned finds out he's Spider-Man. The consequences? Well, Ned keeps the secret and proves 100% supportive. Next, Peter gets detention for disappearing during a school trip. The consequences? He leaves in the middle of detention without anyone stopping or punishing him. Next, throughout the story, he flakes on his love interest, first at her party, then during the hotel stay in DC. The consequences? She goes to the homecoming dance with him anyway because somehow nobody asked her out. Then at the end, Peter exposes her father as a criminal and puts him in jail. The consequences? She moves away and there's no emotional weight to it. Nothing is lost because the movie failed to develop their relationship. She carries no resentment towards Spider-Man, and Peter shows about 20 seconds worth of remorse. And why should he be upset? After all, once he loses her, the script hands him another romantic option in the following scene. Sadly, the entire movie is like this. It's supposed to be a story of a kid making his way through his teenage years and learning valuable lessons, but there's no value in the lessons because Peter gets off easy anytime he lies, breaks the rules, or makes major mistakes. In the end, he's given an opportunity to join the Avengers, but he certainly doesn't earn it. This sucks because he doesn't suffer. I already went over the empty consequences he faces as Peter Parker, and it's the same deal when he's Spider-Man. When he gets beaten up by the Vulture, he gets saved. When he causes the destruction of a fairy and fails to web it back together, he gets saved. When he gets his suit taken away from him, he completes one mission and he gets offered an even better suit as a reward. And that brings us to another reason why the character sucks, and it's because at the end he makes an empty sacrifice. He turns down the new suit, not because he genuinely wants to be a neighborhood superhero, but because he thinks Iron Man is testing him and that turning down the suit is the correct answer. This caps off his weak transformation into a more responsible guy, and it's hard to think of him as a hero when he's constantly being coddled by the writers. Every bad choice is excused, every lie is forgiven, and every punishment is hollow. For a good example, let's look at Terminator 1 and its hero Sarah Connor. Sarah is similar to Homecoming Peter in the sense that she needs help from a mentor in order to navigate the events of the story. But unlike Peter, Sarah loses everything she cares about, faces overwhelming pressure, doubts herself, and has to rise to the challenge when she's at her weakest. She's initially portrayed as an everyday waitress who can barely balance her checkbook, and that's where her safety net Kyle Reese comes in. He protects her from the Terminator and more importantly teaches her how to survive and how to prepare for the future war. This type of safety net adds realism while enabling her to grow into the warrior she needs to become. But things aren't easy for her. Danger and death follow her everywhere she goes, and when she makes mistakes, she pays for it. For instance, she initially struggles to trust Kyle Reese, which gets people killed while leading her into more danger. Later, she underestimates the Terminator and offers her location when it poses as her mother over the phone. This leads to Reese getting wounded, and that creates a situation where she has to become a leader and motivate him to keep fighting. Ultimately, her experiences enable her to survive and to prepare her son for the future war against the machines. And this works because the safety net enables realistic character growth. An everyday person like Sarah isn't equipped to survive a situation like this, but with help, she can become a warrior and a leader. And even with Kyle Reese's help, her journey is marked with desperation and doubt. These internal struggles not only humanize her, but they give her something to overcome. Another reason why this works is because Sarah is constantly suffering. Throughout the movie, she suffers by facing violent encounters, bearing the burden of having to save humanity, and enduring personal losses like the deaths of her roommate, mother, and Kyle Reese. And finally, Sarah becomes heroic by rising to the challenge. She battles a nearly invincible opponent, accepts her destiny, and embraces a leadership role. And our third type of bad hero is the cheat code hero. This is a hero whose powers adapt to the plot. Whenever there's an obstacle, it's like the hero enters a cheat code to either become stronger or unleash a new ability. Skills are usually unearned, new powers come out of nowhere, personal growth and value tests are underwhelming, and the conflict falls flat because the hero solves problems with new or enhanced powers rather than clever use of existing ones. For a bad example, let's look at Rey from Star Wars. Now let's be honest here, the Star Wars fanbase has analyzed her to death, and if you have an internet connection, you've probably heard all the criticisms about how she masters the Force without training, does whatever the plot needs her to do, and somehow conjures up new superpowers whenever she faces a challenge. So rather than vomiting up the same criticisms that you've already heard a million times before, I'm going to point out a major mistake with her that doesn't get talked about enough. Now, if you remember, in The Force Awakens, she and Finn fight a lightsaber duel against a wounded Kylo Ren who uses pain to energize himself. Kylo defeats Finn, and then Rey recovers the lightsaber with her level 99 Force powers. From there, they duel in the forest, where Kylo pushes her to her limit. He holds back from killing her because he sees potential in her, which I have no problem with, but then here's the bad part. she wins the battle. Now, why is this a problem? Well, this is the first entry in a planned trilogy. I'm probably being generous with the word planned, but regardless, you have a situation where the main character is about a third of the way through her journey, and she's battling the main villain. In order to sustain the conflict over the rest of the trilogy, we need to allow room for improvement. In other words, she should lose this battle so that we look forward to the rematch. Now, here's another thing to consider. This is Rey's first lightsaber duel against a Sith Lord, and she wins. With that in mind, look at all the other Star Wars movie heroes and the outcome of their first lightsaber duel against a Sith Lord. Qui-Gon dies. Obi-Wan loses the actual duel, but survives thanks to bad writing. Anakin gets his arm chopped off. Yoda reaches a stalemate. Mace Windu and 3 other Jedi win, well, sort of. Then Luke gets his hand chopped off, and Finn gets badly wounded. Now, with the exception of Mace Windu, all the other Jedi fail to win their first battle against a Sith Lord. This is important from a storytelling standpoint because lightsaber battles are what define the characters in the Star Wars franchise. They're not just colorful spectacle, they represent where characters are on their personal journeys and how they have room to grow. Now, with that in mind, Rey wins her first battle against a Sith Lord, and she wins it in the first movie of the trilogy. That doesn't leave much room for growth at all. I mean, imagine if Luke faced Vader in A New Hope and defeated him. Would there be any hype for the rematch in Empire? Of course not. And that's why, from a storytelling standpoint, it was bad to give Rey a victory at such an early point in the trilogy. And you can say, oh, Kylo wasn't at full strength, but come on, he was well into his training at this point. He should not lose this battle. This could have also been a great opportunity to have Rey recognize her shortcomings while also witnessing the power of the dark side, while being tempted by the dark side. This temptation could have made her conflicted and compelling in episodes 8 and 9, and it could have made her a better hero in the long run. But instead, this sucks because Rey is as powerful as the plot needs her to be. What makes it even worse is that she doesn't earn her powers. She doesn't study or practice or train. Instead, she and Kylo connect minds, then boom, she's at the top of the leaderboard. And as a result, we're left with underwhelming personal growth and shallow conflict because Force abilities always give her the tools she needs. For a good example, let's talk about Rocky Balboa. Now, I love his character to death, but even I have to admit that he enters some cheat codes throughout the franchise. I mean, he has unlimited health, tons of extra lives. I think he even uses the rare candy glitch. There's a lot about him that stretches believability. And in the first movie, he goes from being a club boxer who can barely beat Spider Rico to becoming someone who goes 15 rounds with heavyweight champ Apollo Creed. And yet, despite catching some lucky breaks, Rocky proves heroic because he's flawed and challenged enough to remain compelling. Not only that, he holds true to his value of persistence, and he embodies the human spirit by picking himself up again and again, even after his face looks like something out of a slasher movie. Best of all, he loses the first fight against Apollo Creed. This makes Rocky even more impressive because the story challenges the idea of what it means to be heroic. A typical hero inspires us through winning, but Rocky inspires us because he's human and courageous enough to rise above his limitations. There's a point in the 14th round where he's barely able to stand up, and when he gets wrecked by Creed, the show looks like it's over. Rocky's exhausted beyond belief, his manager tells him to stay down to protect himself, his girlfriend can't bear to watch, everything's falling apart, and yet Rocky climbs to his feet and demands more punishment. Despite this heroic effort, Creed wins, and although this movie was written to be a standalone story, the outcome sets up nicely for a rematch in the sequel. And then, throughout the rest of the franchise, Rocky loses, makes mistakes, and finds new ways to pick himself up again. This works because despite being as strong as the plot requires, Rocky faces obstacles that are challenging and meaningful. Not only does he fight the heavyweight champ, but he also fights negative beliefs about his own self-worth. External and internal conflict force him to rise to the level of hero. All the while, he embodies values that are brutally tested by his opponents, which of course leads to compelling personal growth. Better yet, he trains in order to get stronger and learn new skills. Finally, the conflict is engaging because Rocky overcomes his problems by way of persistence, guts, and accepting help from the people he cares about. Just like all of us, he can only go so far on his own, and what makes him a hero are the people who support him and give him the strength to get up again and again. So I hope this helps. Question of the day, who is the worst hero in your opinion? And who's the best? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you for watching. If you want to support the channel, please pick up a copy of any one of my books and be sure to leave reviews on Amazon. Entry Wounds is great if you like thrillers. It's about a guy who picks up a haunted gun and he can't put it down till he kills 6 people with it. Also, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Check out my other videos. Maybe hit that thanks button for me. And as always, remember to keep on writing.